Well, welcome to Valley Hoops Insider Podcast, and you can see it there, Voices of the Valley. Very excited today to have our friend Rocco Miller on. He's from Bracketeer.org, and he's the guy that's going to tell us which teams are going to make it, which teams aren't, how the brackets are all playing out, seedings, all those kinds of things. He's a brilliant guy in that arena and a good friend, and we welcome Rocco Miller into the conversation. Rocco, thanks for taking time with us today. We are creeping closer to the stuff that we're all longing to see take place.
Yeah, we are, and it's gone by so fast, Harry. By the way, it's great to be back on the show with you. I feel like it was just yesterday we were looking at all the transfer portal updates, and I worked, tirelessly throughout the offseason on scheduling, and it really doesn't seem to stop during the COVID era because we've had a couple games happen on the fly. I was actually at Loyola Chicago San Francisco game in Utah. That was pretty cool. We had a few others that came together this year, not as crazy as last year, thankfully. And even out here in the West, we're still doing a bunch of makeup games. Like Oregon and Washington State had a makeup game last night. A lot of these leagues out here playing 3 games a week. So it's been crazy, and it's so much to keep up with. It feels like more than usual because we haven't really gotten back to normal college basketball life even. But, I mean, this is such a tremendous time of year. And next thing you know, you look up and we're less than 3 weeks from Arch Madness. It blows my mind.
It's crazy. Yeah, and the OVC is making up games as we speak. The Missouri Valley,
Right.
I think, has made up all their games,
I
but
think
the
so.
OVC has some to pick up. For people that are new to seeing you on our site, Bracketeer.org, tell people about your background, like just, how you ended up doing this and some of the work you put into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a longtime lover of the sport, from a broad view, from a national view. I grew up in the Seattle area and family ties all over the U.S., anywhere from Indiana to Wisconsin to Pennsylvania. So, when I was growing up, we had the Final Four twice in Seattle. I've thought about this more over the years. And that was a huge deal in my childhood because we would go down to the Fan Fest. Couldn't always afford a ticket back then, but just being in the environment and seeing fans come into the city from all over the country was so exciting. Then, in 93, the Fab Five was in Seattle for the Elite Eight. We did get tickets for that. It's a game a lot of people forget about because everybody remembers Chris Webber calling the timeout in the championship game. But that Elite Eight game, go back and look it up. It was an amazing overtime game where Michigan on many occasions almost lost to Temple. And that Temple team was a 7 seed that would have been one of the best stories of the 90s if they would have won that game. Didn't work out, but that was such a fun game to be a part of. And so anyway, just all these little memories. I watched the tournament religiously as long as I can remember, probably since I was 5 years old. And so, as this bracketology era took over, I think Lenardi first introduced it in 96. So now it's been like 25, 26 years. I got really kind of into that early on, I'd say early 2000s. And then on Selection Sunday, I think, late 2000, that 2000 to 2010 decade, I'd actually like handwrite my bracket out. And just, on my own, I didn't really share it with anybody besides, close friends and whatnot. But I started realizing that I could actually get a little closer to accurate than Lenardi was. So I got pretty competitive about it. And then, as we got into the 2010s, Twitter was introduced in around that time. I think I created my account in 2011. Can't believe that's already happened for 10 years now. And then I, started putting it publicly on Twitter. Started the website, I think in 2014 or 15. Joined the Writers Association right after that. And so every year, like bracketology is always going to be the base for me. But so much goes into that, like scheduling, matchups, breakdowns, that I'm just as much interested in all of that as I am in bracketology. So it's been really fun to get on the road, cover games. I think I've now, in the last 5 years, been to games in almost every conference. I think I'm missing like 7 conferences, but 25 of the 32. So, yeah, I mean, it's just been awesome to get this big macro perspective because a lot of fans of the sport, they're interested in their team, they're interested in their league, but they don't understand a lot of like what's going on broadly. So I'm kind of here to provide that.
Yeah, and you put a lot of stuff out there about breakdowns and hot teams and rising teams and conference makeups, and really appreciate your work. When we think about bracketology and bracketologists, I think fans get the wrong idea. They think that Lenardi or yourself or Jerry Palm or different people, they're uh, trying to throw their influence out there, that, like, you're just a Big East guy, that kind of thing,
Right.
versus you guys are trying to predict what you believe the committee is going to end up doing. Do I have that correct?
You do have that correct. Now, it is confusing, though, because now we're at a point in time where a lot of fans know about the bracket matrix, which basically scores all of us. And Lenardi and Palm don't do as well in those usually because there are a lot of ace, quote unquote, bracketologists by the end. So what a lot of them do, might be a little different. They might you see a lot of bad brackets out there, and that might just be somebody throwing one out there, and that could confuse people. But by and large, yeah, those of us that are doing this religiously throughout the season, not just at the final hour, we're doing our best guess at what we think the committee cares about. For myself personally, I do a lot of research on the history. I think I have the last 5 to 10 years of selection committee chairman interviews recorded. And what I like to do, especially around this time of year, is go back and watch those. Because a lot of this, if you know how the committee works, it's a collection of administrators and athletic directors, from different parts of the country in an effort to get different opinions in the room. And when a person enters their first year, a lot of times they really don't know what they're getting into. And so they start to just adopt and learn from the guys who were there the year before, or the gals that were there the year before. And that's how they start to learn. So a lot of these, it's like a big game of telephone over the years. A lot of these same principles and policies haven't changed. But I will say that since 2019, we did have the introduction of the net, which got us away from RPI, and that's allowed more data to be available to the committee, and it's more to consider. So I've had to adopt and shift with them as we go along. But I'm part of a few different networks of other basketball groups, like Hoops HD is a fun little group we've had together for about a decade, and we have the opportunity there to interview some of the committee members over time and during the off season. So it's always very interesting to pick their brain on these things.
So when I, as a 5-cent bracketologist, meaning I don't even fill one out, but I think about it. I ponder it a lot. When they introduced the net, my thinking was, this is the Bible now. First 68, you're in, minus, conference tournaments and all of those kinds of things. So it's not the Bible, but how much is the net the core, the foundation of how they do put the bracket together?
So that's an excellent question. So I think the net, in almost all cases, is more important for your opponents than it is for yourself. So it's a way to sort your results against your opposition. So like if I'm looking at Loyola Chicago, you can quickly see that they played number 8 in the net, Auburn. They played number 24 in the net, Michigan State. Those were their 2 toughest games. And you can start to break down the results by their toughest games. And the way that the quadrants were set up between 1, 2, 3, and 4, in last year's update, they actually broke quad 1 and quad 2 in half. So we have a 1A, a 1B, a 2A, and a 2B. And so when you have a power conference team, that kind of helps quite a bit because, like think about Porter Mosier's down at Oklahoma now. We were talking about him before the show. They have so many games in those quad 1 area. You need to be able to kind of filter it more, right? Like a game at Kansas or at Baylor is a lot tougher than a game at Kansas State or somebody at the bottom of the league. So that's helped tremendously as well to kind of get some of the paper tigers exposed, if you will. But yeah, the significance of the net is typically about your opponents. Now, there are exceptions. A great exception is out there in the Ohio Valley with Belmont, a team right now that I have super close to the bubble. I think if they ended in this situation, and we'll probably get into them, they'll be heavily discussed because there's not a lot of de facto things that says they're not in, and there's not a lot of de facto things that says they are in. So it could come down to, there's 5 other metrics also on the NCAA sheets. 2 of them are resume based. That's the KPI and the strength of resume, better known as the SOR. And then they have the 3 predictives, which are KenPom, Sagarin, and ESPN's BPI metric. Those are all just available as resources should the committee need it. It's debatable how much they do use it, but I think on a team like Belmont, you have to look at those closely. And if you want to compare them to like Michigan, or if you want to compare them to Memphis, or if, anybody that are near them in the bubble conversation, it becomes pretty important then. You don't want it to be, it's 60 plus or something that's just going to give them a reason to leave you out.
It's interesting. So I always start to take notes when you're talking. I think I'm recording this. I can listen to it and take the notes later. So those other metrics are important as well. I think the net is almighty, and I think a lot of fans end up thinking that same thing. Right. And I do have a question about that, and then I want to break down the Missouri Valley and Ohio Valley and maybe 1 or 2 other random schools. But you mentioned the dividing quad 1 and 2 and a half and all of those kinds of things. But I'm playing, fill in the blank university, and they're a net 23. And then 3 weeks later, they're a net 42. Which of those numbers am I getting? Am I getting the one that is final at March 13th? Am I getting the number when I played them? How does that play out?
Yeah, you're actually getting them you're getting the number that they finish with. So it's a revolving door for a lot of these teams. And that's why bracketology is always interesting because, Monday morning, yesterday, I'll sit down and do the entire exercise based on what the rankings say that day and based on how the results are filtered, how everything is broken down. I do think it's also important to call out that I have a separation in mind, especially for leagues that get a lot of opportunities, right? Power leagues especially, to make sure that I'm writing down separately which teams that are projected tournament teams they've beaten specifically. I don't care what their ranking is. Like if I'm saying North Carolina's in the field, if you beat North Carolina, I'm going to write that down separately. I'm going to list out all of your wins against projected tournament teams because I think that is a great way to really see who's for real and who's not. And unfortunately for like a Belmont, they had 2 really good wins against Iona and St. Louis. And over the weekend, both those teams fell apart. Iona just took a second bad loss in their league. St. Louis got swept by the Bonnies yesterday. So that hurt Belmont. And Belmont couldn't do anything about it because at the time they played those games, those were great wins. And it doesn't mean they're not great wins later. It just means it's harder to say, okay, Belmont beat 2 tournament teams, put them in. Now you got to look a little closer. So all of that is constantly shifting. And so when you look at my bracketology updates each week, or Mondays and Fridays as it is in February, I'm constantly reevaluating. There's really no shortcuts. I think you might find other bracketologists that do shortcuts. I think it's a disservice to the fans and the college basketball community at large. Because you got to go through the process from start to finish to be able to tell the story appropriately.
Yeah, it's so amazing to me. Like I said, all of a sudden I have a quad 1 win that, oops, no, it's not. And so, I think those are interesting things. One final question about data. The point differential, how does that factor in? I beat you by 12 or I beat you by 10 or I beat you by 30. What does it mean?
Well, I think it's starting to mean more than it used to. I'll tell you that, Harry, because like I said before, you got the predictive metrics show up on the sheet, right? And what we saw last year, which was really, I think, an example that I have to start using for this year, in the seeds like 5 through 9, at least those seeds, a lot of it came back to predictive metrics instead of resume. And that's a lot different than kind of the old days, very different. So it seems to me that the committee cares about resume a great deal to get the right 68 teams in. But once they've got you in, then they can kind of slot you up and down based on how they think you're actually going to perform, because models like KenPom's model are built to predict what you're going to do next, not talk about what you've already done. And so when you go out, like Loyola Chicago just blew out Northern Iowa. So I'm sure their KenPom went up, their net improved, because the net also has predictive components in it with also a strength of schedule component. And so you start to see those things improve when you have a 30-point blowout versus maybe an 8-point win. And I think coaches have figured this out, and I think they've known about it since 2019. I noticed right before Nate Oates left Buffalo to go to Alabama, that Nate Oates was doing this, back in 2019, and Buffalo ended up with an incredible net ranking that year and got a 6th seed in the tournament. And almost all their MAC games where they were winning by 20 or so every night, he was leaving their regulars in almost till the final horn. Wow. And I think a lot of other coaches have caught on. One other example, I was here covering the Wyoming Cowboys against San Jose State on Saturday night, and they left their starters in all the way till the end. And it was a game that stayed around a 10-point lead the whole second half. They ended up winning by 22. So it's just, I'm an old soul when it comes to college basketball. I think it's an unnecessary thing to do. But obviously there's all the motivation in the world to do that, and coaches have caught on.
It's very interesting. You have a West Coast bias. What I mean by that is that you live out there, you see those teams a lot, but the West Coast has some great basketball this year. I mean, the West Coast of college basketball has ascended this year. You should have a West Coast bias, is really what I'm saying, because it's really picked up on the left side, hasn't it?
It's been awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've been, locally close with the San Francisco Dons program here for the last I've only lived here 7-8 years. Like I said, I'm originally from Seattle, but it's been an awesome program to work with. It's been incredible to see these guys stick together, a lot like a Valley team does. And now they have a bunch of 5th-year seniors. They got one of the best players in the conference from San Diego to transfer in this year. I think that's just taking them to a new level. Yahin Masalski is probably going to be all West Coast Conference. And St. Mary's is always good. Santa Clara is having their best year since the 90s. So I've kind of gotten lucky. I haven't had a lot of reasons to leave because I'm getting great basketball in my backyard finally. And I do like covering the WCC a little bit more than the Pac-12 because Pac-12 gets a lot of coverage nationally. And, one thing I like to, specialize in is covering undercovered stories, undercovered teams, which is why, Harry, you and I are always talking about Missouri Valley, Ohio Valley. Like I'm always trying to represent those programs because they impress me, and they're the teams that everybody wants to know about in March when, you see Oral Roberts go to the Sweet 16 last year, those types of examples.
Saying the Pac-12 is better this year as well. Well, the people that are watching this, they don't give a rip. They don't even know the Pac-12 exists. We want to talk about the Missouri Valley Conference.
That's right.
So we've got 5 teams in the Valley that are all like 110 or better in the net. And they're battling for first place in the conference as well. I mapped it out, and each one of them has at least one game against each other on the closing stretch here of their last 4 or 5 games. Before we talk about more teams, Loyola is obviously the one with the most ink nationally, the best net nationally, the best KenPom nationally. They have name recognition. If Loyola just they win 4 of their last 5 games, and then they go to Arch Madness and win. Give me a rough seed area for Loyola Chicago.
Yeah, so today I have Loyola Chicago as they're a 9 right now. So 38th overall in the country. So, they're right in the middle of that 9 seed area. I'm sorry, let me take that back. That's actually a 10 seed. My math's a little slow this morning, but so they're a 10 seed, but they've been a 9, they've been an 8. If they keep winning, the good news for Loyola Chicago is they're right around a bunch of teams that are very bubblish from power conferences. So some of those will fall. I think they'll work their way back up to a 9 or an 8. Now, I'll say this. I think about this a lot. If I'm a fan of Loyola Chicago, I don't want to be a 9 or an 8. I'd much rather be in this 10 spot they're in, as long as you're not too far down the totem pole that you have to go to the first 4 or something like that. You want to be a 7-10 game because you have a much better chance of advancing to the second weekend. Now, Loyola Chicago defied all those odds last year and beat Illinois in the second round. But chances are, I think I saw the breakdown at one point, you only have about a 10% chance historically if you're the 8-9 winner beating the 1 seed. So it's like a 1 in 10 chance. Whereas when you're where you're a 7 or a 10 playing as a 2, it's much higher. It's like a 23% chance. And so as a fan, I would want to be in that 7-10 situation in almost all cases.
So if Loyola finishes great, they win Arch Madness, you're telling me they're going to be a 9 or a 10 potentially. We'll just set that there for a minute. The other 4 teams in the Missouri Valley Conference that, are trying to win the conference outright right now, and also, obviously going to Arch Madness, hoping to win there. So those other 4 teams, are really outstanding basketball teams. Loyola makes it. They play well. They get to the final of the Missouri Valley tournament, and they lose the Missouri Valley tournament championship. Forget the other team for a minute. Loyola's chances of making it to the NCAA tournament, because I don't think any of the other teams have nearly the resume that could get them there.
Yeah, I think it is just for a 2-bid Valley. Long story short, we need Loyola Chicago to get beat in the Arch Madness tournament. And I think as long as Loyola Chicago finishes the regular season strong heading into that, they'll be in. So that does give us a really good shot at 2 bids. Like you said, there are 5 great teams in the Valley right now. And I would give the other 4 probably, if you say, Rocco, do you take Loyola Chicago or the other 4? I take my chances with the other 4 because I think any of them could beat Loyola Chicago. So might get a couple cracks at it throughout that tournament, especially if you think they'll be the top 5 seeds. Loyola Chicago will have to play the 4-5 winner theoretically in the semifinals, and then probably another tough one in the championship game. But I do think Loyola Chicago's getting closer and closer to a lock. They have that big game at Northern Iowa this Sunday. They also host Bradley next week. So, they don't want to stub their toe against one of the bottom 5 teams.
Yeah, absolutely. They can't do that. So I'm encouraged. I just have to get the Ramblers to lose sometime that first weekend of March so we can get 2 teams into the tournament. A team like Drake, who was way up there in the net earlier and has fallen on some harder times. And then Bradley, who's the hottest team in the league right now. And as you know, they've won 2 of the last, 3 Arch Madness tournaments. I mean, Brian Wardle builds his teams to be good right now. And they've ascended in the net. When I go through and I look and I've looked at all the information, they all have, when they play each other, they're all quad 1 or quad 2 games. And then they'll meet again at Arch Madness, again with quad 1, quad 2 games if those top 4 or 5 are playing each other. How much of an opportunity does that give to any of those teams to really climb the net ladder?
Yeah, I think whoever would come out of the mix of Bradley, Drake, I guess we're just talking about those 2, but
Missouri State, Northern Iowa,
yeah, we can include all 4 of them. I think out of any of the 4, the only team that could really enter the at-large picture would be Missouri State, because they've got the road win at Loyola Chicago. That's a tournament-level road win. But Missouri State's got a lot of mix of bad from earlier this year. It's really hard to envision them getting it at large. But if we take any of the 4 in general, they go on and win the Arch Madness trophy. They're obviously automatically in the tournament. I think depending on the carnage that happens across the country in other conference tournaments, they could easily land as a dangerous 12 seed. At the very worst, they would land at a 13. And that just depends on what kind of champions we see from a lot of other leagues. So like right now, if you just look at the board, North Texas is a team that's dominating. If they lost in their conference tournament to a lesser team, same with Iona, New Mexico State, South Dakota State, teams that have had great seasons. I would see if any of those fell, I would put the Northern Iowa, Bradley, Drake, Missouri State combo above them. And Missouri State's in kind of their own bucket there because their metrics are so good. They've blown out so many teams.
Right.
And when they usually lose heartbreakers. So the metrics love that. And they're basically painting a picture to the committee that if Missouri State's in the field, they're dangerous. Perhaps they could get up to an 11.
And I know the net moves every day, and so I don't know how official my numbers are, but right now Missouri State is a 60. Last time I looked, 60 at 55 in the Ken Palm. Those are solid numbers, and and they could climb. We should shift gears, though, to the Ohio Valley Conference. Murray State, 14 games in a row. They've won 24, I guess it is, and have a 2-game lead in the regular season race. They play Belmont still here at the end of the season. When they play each other, that will be a quad 1 game for both of them.
Yes.
And so Ohio Valley, the Murray State team first, regardless of what happens in Evansville, are they in the tournament?
Almost assuredly, unless they lose to somebody in the 300s. I think they even have the wiggle room to do that now, because I think a lot of people might forget they won at Memphis earlier this year, and last week with Memphis's road win at Houston, which was huge, a huge shift in the bubble conversation. Memphis gained 27 points in the net, or 27 spots. They were in the 70s at last Monday. Today they're 44. So now all of a sudden Murray State's got another quad 1B win to go along with the road Belmont win. They also beat Chattanooga at home, who's an excellent Southern Conference team. They also won at Morehead State, the 3rd best team in the league. So I think there's room for them to lose again, even in a bad loss scenario, to get in. They're basically, I hate saying locked, but they're as close as you can get for a small conference dominant team. And I would just say this, like Murray State as a whole, when we get to bracket season, filling out your bracket season, I mean, they're a top 10 team nationally in offensive rebounding percentage. That's a really important stat. You get so many second chances at the basket. They give a lot of teams problems, including, teams at Memphis's level. They're a top 25 team in ball protection. KJ Williams, Tevin Brown, and Justice Hill probably all have pro futures. I mean, this is a loaded team. So, looking at some recent history, we saw that Wofford team, I think it was 2019 tournament, first year of the net. They got all the way to 18 in net at by the selection Sunday. They end up getting a 7 seed. I see Murray State on that similar projection. If they continue to just win out, beat Belmont 2 more times, they could actually get up to a 6 seed. Right now I have them as an 8. Wow. But I would hate for like I said before with Loyola Chicago, I'd hate for a team having this good of a season to land as an 8-9 game. So ideally Murray State gets another big win or 2 along the way, and then they get up to at least a 7.
So you've given us such good news today. You have basically told us Loyola and Murray have it in front of them to make it, whether they win their tournament or not, and to have a decent seed if they win their tournament. Let's turn to those Belmont Bruins. Both those teams obviously on the way to the Missouri Valley Conference next year. But Belmont, the last time I looked, 47 in the net, 62 in Ken Palm. The Bruins, they have to win the OVC tournament to get in, I assume?
They have to win it to feel safe. They have a massive game on the 24th at Murray State. It's a road opportunity, clearly against an NCAA caliber team that would go down as their best win of the season if they get that win. Now, the last time they played Murray, of course, they got blown out on their home court. I'm sure Coach Alexander is going to have a lot of adjustments in store. Fascinated to watch that game on a Thursday. But assuming that they don't get it done that day, they go to Evansville in the same situation. They'll have to play more. I think the important thing is you have that OVC tournament format where they get top 2 teams get buys to the semis. So you figure they'll play Morehead in that semi. And Morehead's a team that's had Belmont's number. Already beat them this year. The game last weekend came down to the last possession. So Belmont's in hot water in the semifinals. They get that win. Then they lose to Murray in the final. That will give them 3 losses to Murray, but also ascend Murray to a higher echelon in people's minds, right? So won't look as bad. I think we get to Selection Sunday with Belmont as one of the most hotly debated teams in the room, because then they're just sitting there waiting for a week to see what everybody else does, and they'll just be there for the committee to discuss. And it happened. We've seen this just 3 years ago. They're in that same position, and the committee ended up putting them in Dayton, which was great to see. I think there's a lot of similarities this year. You still have a team that beat Iona. Most of the same players. Yeah, I mean, Moose is a senior now. It's crazy. Yeah. Time flies. But you're talking about a team, Harry, that's beaten Chattanooga. They beat Iona. They beat Drake on a neutral. They obviously won at SLU. So those are 4 wins that aren't going anywhere. And you're talking about an Iona and a Chattanooga team that have a great chance to win their leagues. So that would be, some tournament level wins at that point. And then, who knows? Maybe if Drake wins the Arch Madness, that actually helps them look better too. So there's a lot of things they have to root for there.
Yeah, it's so amazing. So I live here in St. Louis, and the Billikens took not a terrible loss, but a bad loss yesterday. And so they could get hot and win 4 or 5 games and go deep in the A10 tournament. And all of a sudden their resume goes up, which affects Belmont. I mean, it's so weird how those other things play out. I do want to ask you, I think the Billikens are dead in the water, obviously, other than winning the A10 tournament. We talked before we came on, and I don't want to keep you a lot longer. Porter Moser, deserted us for the Big 12, and I keep in contact with Porter, and I'm excited about some of the big wins they've had. Are they a tournament team in your mind today? I think the latest I looked at, 37 in the net. If they're in, where do you slot them seed-wise as of today? As we know, a ton will still play out.
A ton will still play out, Harry. And I did have Oklahoma, the second team out yesterday. And a big reason for that is, they've done really well for his first year. Let's just put that out there. They've had some incredible performances when they beat Arkansas by 20+. Arkansas has taken off since then. So that win has grown like a fine wine, where it's just gotten better with age. And I think Arkansas is going to continue to play well. That's going to help them. But the problem when you're at a place like Oklahoma, it's almost the opposite situation as the Valley teams we just discussed, is you have opportunity after opportunity after opportunity in the Big 12. And so then the things you're looking at a little bit more closely, from my vantage point, is their overall win percentage in these opportunities. And right now, you look at the top 3 quadrants combined, let's just go agnostic against the opposition. Oklahoma's just 8-11 in those 19 games. If you look at the top 2, they're 7-10. And 6 of them are in quad 1. So you have to take them seriously because of that. I'm sorry, there's 6 of them in the first 2, 3 of them in the first quad, looking at the wrong column there. But so with their wins they have, that gets them in the conversation. But you keep losing like this in the Big 12, you're eventually going to just fall off. We saw that just happen last night with West Virginia. West Virginia is also in their league. Their records are just getting so far out of whack, you can't select them. Kansas State's been in that situation. Now Kansas State keeps winning. They're actually catching up and might pass Oklahoma if they stay on that trajectory. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, between the Oklahoma, Kansas State, West Virginia trio, whoever wins the most games from here might land in, but the other 2 probably fall off just, because they have a lot of matchups against each other coming up. So I think that's where he sits. Now, the great bonus here is you get 2 amazing teams, Kansas and Baylor, in that league. If you get a win over either of those along the way, and Oklahoma almost got one this weekend, they were winning a lot of that game against Kansas. If you get one of those wins, it kind of changes the dynamics, because now you have a piece of gold on your resume, an elite win, if you will. And, so if they get that kind of changes the picture a little bit.
So interesting. Listen, people, you're watching this, and we're talking to Rocco Miller. I've got it there on the screen, Bracketeer.org. If you want to know what's really probably going to happen, this is the guide you need to follow. And you will get so filled up with information and all the other stuff on your website that you kind of leak out there and blast out there for people to get a hold of. I so appreciate what you do for people like me, people that are just college basketball fans that want to know more and try to gobble it up. How will you spend the next 2.5, 3 weeks? I mean, just do you lock all the doors and get out the 4 computers with 3 screens and lots of coffee and type, and you have the abacus out and doing all the math? I mean, what's the next couple of weeks like?
That's an awesome question, Harry. And thank you for all the kind words. I greatly appreciate it. And I love all of your work. It's been awesome to follow you over the years and keep up what you're doing. Last year, Harry, I had no other choice but to do that, be stuck indoors and just do math all day.
Right.
And I probably, in fairness, I probably watched more live games than ever because there was literally nothing else to do, screens everywhere. This year, I'm going to get out there and do a little bit more. I'm going to keep covering games, at least a couple a week, as we go forward. My wife and I, we're going down to Tucson tomorrow. So I'll be at both Arizona games this week. She went to school there. So we're just going to do a little reunion weekend. And then,
that's what you're telling her. I think that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
honey, it's reunion weekend.
It's reunion weekend. Let's get down there. So I'm mixing it up more this year. We're also considering posting up in Las Vegas for a couple weeks during championship week. Now, not getting into any of the craziness, just, having our own place. And then, late at night, those are the only games left. So I was thinking about this a little more strategically. And I'm like, hey, when it's 10 o'clock, the only games left are like WCC tournament or Mountain West. Maybe if we're in town, then, I can watch all the other games and go to one of those at the end of the night. So, I'm playing with some different ideas this year, but by and large, fans and the community can expect me to not get much sleep on at least Sundays and Thursdays. Those are the nights I do the bracket update and really do a thorough analysis. And in March, it's almost every night. So no matter what I do during the day, I'm ultimately going to have to come back to that at the end of the day. So
final question. So the bracket comes out on whatever date that is, 13th, 14th, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the tournament starts. You just kick back, feet on the sofa, take in the games. I mean, what happens then?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we have a little tradition that we've had to get down to Vegas to watch them and have some fun. Obviously didn't get to do that last year. We'll see if we do it this year. And this year, very, very lucky. First time San Francisco has ever hosted a regional. So I'll be there covering that on the second weekend, Sweet 16 Elite 8 at the brand new Chase Center just down the street from me right now. Very much looking forward to that. And the past handful of years, I've gotten down to the Final Four with the exception of last year. There's a lot of people in town in general from the community to meet and network with. So that's in New Orleans this year. Very much looking forward to that week. So yeah, there's still a lot going on. And I like to sink my teeth in just like the fans on the matchups and do some deep breakdowns on the analytics on the matchups are everything in the NCAA tournament. It's all about how you match up stylistically against the opponent to know if you'll have a chance at a Cinderella or not. So I love that stuff. So I'll be involved throughout.
He's at the Sweet 16. He's at the Final Four. He's just a big deal. He's spending time with me today. I feel important now. Hey, appreciate the time. Well, there was one thing I knew I was going to ask you. Oh, this is totally left field. Eye test for the committee members. Is that a thing?
A little bit.
That's what I was afraid. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah. So the way it works is they have 12 members this year. First time ever, by the way. So that's a good stat. It's always been 10. They expanded to 12. A lot of cynical people think that's in an effort to help power conferences even more. We'll see how it plays out over time. But with 12 people, they're all assigned certain leagues. So let's say there's 32 leagues, there's 12 people. I have no idea how the format's working, but they would all be assigned 3 leagues or 2 leagues at least. So it's up to those members to go and watch those games. In fact, for the longest time, Stanford's AD, Bernard Muir, was on the committee. He was the chairman a couple of years ago, and he served, a handful of years going into that, ahead of that. And Bernard, I saw one of his interviews, and he, in fact, it's in one of the documentaries about the Stanford scandal with like the sailing team, all that stuff that came out. Where he wasn't paying attention to any other sport because he was on the committee watching games in his office, and he kept telling people to go away.
Leave me alone.
Leave me alone. I gotta, so he was like responsible for the Mountain West and Pac-12 or, something along those lines. So they're all responsible for certain leagues. I think they all take it seriously because there's a long list of ADs that want to get in, and it's more likely you're never going to get in than you are going to get in. So they take it very seriously, and there's so much money in it that. Obviously, that example I just gave, it always takes priority. So it's pretty fascinating. And I don't know how much of that plays in. I'm always off by a few seeds each year, no matter how hard I try. So obviously, there's something in there that's a variable, and maybe it is the eye test. Who knows?
Appreciate the time. Always love getting caught up and getting educated. I always want people on our show that educate me because I need a lot of educating. So Rocco Miller, I appreciate it. You can see his website there on the screen, Bracketeer.org. There's a lot of the bracketologists out there. I like to print out the people's stuff at the end of the year and say, okay, how'd they do? Now, I know you told me there's a website that'll do that for me, tell me who wins, but I don't care about the 400 people that are doing it. There's just a couple famous people and you that I care about. So I just like to analyze and so forth. I always think I'm going to steal yours, change 2 or 3 teams, and then send it in and act like I did all the work. But I decided not to do that. Anyway, Rocco, appreciate the time today. Thanks so much. We'll catch up again sometime soon. But listen, this is the time as basketball fans we live for. So we appreciate your time today. And listen, just knock it out of the park the next couple of weeks.
Sounds great, Harry. Thanks again for having me on. It's always great to catch up. And happy hoops. Can't wait for Arch Madness. It's honestly the best conference tournament in America.
We appreciate it. That's Rocco Miller, Bracketeer.org, and you can go there and learn tons about college basketball. I'm Harry Schroeder, reminding you, since you've been there, make it a better place. We'll see you again real soon.